Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another UCAN session. Today we will focus on the important developments from international relations and as well as from internal security and disaster management that were reported in the news during this period. That is from 2nd of December to 18th of December. So usually we keep these sessions limited to developments from international relations alone. But I would like to expand the discussion, as you have seen in previous sessions as well. I would like to take up topics from internal security and disaster management as well, so that you guys are up to date on all these important topics. So if you like this approach, please let me know in the comments whether going forward, since I'll be taking 2 sessions under UCAN, what we can do is we can keep one session entirely for international relations and the second session, like today's session for example, which is the second session for December, we can not only cover few topics from IR, but also some important developments from internal security and disaster management. So if you prefer this approach, please let me know in the comments and I shall follow the same. So today we have 7 important topics that I have chosen. There are 3 important topics for international relations, 3 important topics for internal security, and a case study with regard to disaster management regarding Cyclone Fengal, which was recently in the news. So let's cover all these 7 topics comprehensively with some practice questions. So stay with me till the end of the session for the next 2 hours, and we shall discuss and cover all these topics comprehensively. If you guys are benefiting from this initiative, you have to support us through your likes and comments. That is how we'll know that these initiatives are reaching you and helping you, and it would motivate us to do better. So do press the like button, share your comments on what you think about the initiative, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And before we start, I have a very important announcement. Recently, we have launched the Ignite Batch, which is an English online classroom program for 2026 IAS aspirants. Similar batches have started in Hindi and bilingual as well. And the best part is you can join these courses at the lowest prices possible. As Unacademy recently marked its 9th anniversary, a special offer was announced and the offer actually ended yesterday. But due to popular demand and the request that we have been getting from students, we have decided to extend the offer by a few more days till 23rd December. So as part of this offer, you get a 50% off on the subscription, plus there is a free extension being provided. If you go for a 9-month subscription, you get a 9-month free extension, making it a 18-month course, which is more than sufficient to help you prepare and clear this particular exam. Similar offer is available for 12 and 18-month subscription as well. Now upon this, there's something special which is being offered by the IAS English team. If you want to get in touch with us and avail one free mentorship session from all our top 5 educators. So basically, if you want 5 free mentorship sessions with our top educators, you need to use a code when you're subscribing to the program, which is IAS English. Ensure that you enter the code IAS English so that our team can forward the details and accordingly we can have a one-on-one mentorship with the top 5 educators from the IAS English team. So let's get started. But please note, if you want the PDF of today's session, both with and without annotations, after the class ends, please join my Telegram channel. Scan the QR code and I shall be sharing the PDF both with and without annotations after the session ends. So let's get started with the first topic, the visit of Sri Lanka's president to India. Over the last couple of days, from 15th to 17th December, Sri Lanka's newly elected president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, carried out a very important visit to India. This was Disanayake's first visit after getting elected as the president of the country, and that is what makes this visit all the more important. Because I always tell my students, in international relations, the symbolic gestures that are sent out by leaders holds a lot of importance. So the first country that a new leader chooses to visit, or the first country that a leader invites, to ensure that the diplomatic relations are promoted. That holds a lot of symbolic value. After a new government is formed, after a new leader is elected, the first country they visit and the first leader they invite to their home country, it is attached with a lot of symbolism, symbolic meaning that clearly shows the priority that a country is giving to the relationship with the other country. For example, many of you might recall the swearing-in ceremony of Prime Minister Modi in 2014 and also the recent swearing-in ceremony in 2024. On both occasions, PM Modi invited the leaders of South Asian countries, which clearly highlighted India's priority towards the neighborhood. And it was during the swearing-in ceremony in 2014 that PM Modi had launched the Neighborhood First policy. So this is a symbolic move. And that is why I said the visit of Dissanayake to India, which happens to be his first visit to a country after getting elected as the president, holds a lot of symbolic value. It shows that Sri Lanka is looking to prioritize its relations with India. So in this context, we need to understand India-Sri Lanka relations in general. I'll give a brief background as well as to why this visit is so important. And then we will discuss all the developments that occurred during this important visit. But before we start, let's take up a prelims practice question. Let's test your knowledge on India-Sri Lanka relations. Which of the following statements is or are correct? There are three statements given. Sri Lanka holds a central place in India's vision of Sagar Doctrine and Neighborhood First policy. Second statement says India-Sri Lanka are members of SAARC, BIMSTEC, BRICS, and the Colombo Security Conclave. And the third statement says India and Sri Lanka have an active ferry service between Nagapattinam and Kanke Senturai. Which of the statements are correct? Let me know in the comments. These are your options. Take a few seconds, read the question carefully, and let's see how many of you can answer this correctly. In the meanwhile, a poll will also be launched and you can give your answer. You can attempt this particular question in the poll. Many of them are saying C. Some are saying B as well. But most of the votes are in favor of C. Very good. 1 and 3, both are correct statements. The Sagar Doctrine was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2015, and it stands for security and growth for all in the region. Through the Sagar Doctrine, India is promising maritime security and economic security and growth for all the Indian Ocean countries. So this is a dedicated foreign policy doctrine of the Modi government designed to step up India's relations with the Indian Ocean countries. So obviously, Sri Lanka is a focused country under our Sagar Doctrine. Sri Lanka is located at the very heart of the Indian Ocean region and plays a critical role in the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean. So obviously, Sri Lanka will remain a focused country under Sagar Doctrine. And Sri Lanka is also an immediate neighbor of India. We share a maritime boundary with this country, and it is a focused country under our Neighborhood First policy, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2014. So Sri Lanka holds a central place in both the Sagar Doctrine and the Neighborhood First policy of India. So statement 1 is correct. Statement 3 is also correct. We have recently launched a ferry service linking Nagapattinam in coastal Tamil Nadu in India with Kanke Senturai port in the Jaffna region of northern Sri Lanka. This is a very old maritime route. It had been suspended 4 decades ago because of the ethnic conflict between the Tamil militant outfits such as LTTE and the Sri Lankan forces. Because of the war in Sri Lanka, the ethnic war, the ferry services had stopped. But after 4 decades, we have recently relaunched this ferry service between Nagapattinam and Kanke Senturai. It was announced last year, and from 2024, this ferry service has started, which will help the Tamil community on both sides to travel to the other side for trade, to connect with their families, and even for the purposes of tourism. So this was a topic which was in the news and we have covered in our previous sessions as well. So statement 3 is also correct. But statement 2 is incorrect. Why? because India, Sri Lanka are members of SAARC, BIMSTEC and Colombo Security Conclave. But Sri Lanka is not a member of BRICS. SAARC is a regional grouping of South Asian countries. Obviously, India, Sri Lanka are part of it, along with other 6 South Asian countries. BIMSTEC is a regional group focused on Bay of Bengal. So India, Sri Lanka are key members of BIMSTEC, along with Bangladesh, Myanmar and Thailand, Nepal and Bhutan. Colombo Security Conclave is focused on maritime security in the Indian Ocean, and it includes India and Sri Lanka. So can you find out the other members and observers to the Colombo Security Conclave? And please mention that in the comments. So I picked this statement because during the visit of Sri Lanka's president and his interaction with Prime Minister Modi, Colombo Security Conclave came up for discussion. As India, Sri Lanka have prioritized defense relations, maritime security relations, Colombo Security Conclave was mentioned in the official joint statement that was issued. And I've mentioned BRICS as well because Sri Lanka has sought BRICS membership and it has urged India to support its candidature. Aruna Dissanayake, who met with PM Modi, urged India to support Sri Lanka's application. Sri Lanka has recently applied for BRICS membership. As you might know, BRICS has recently expanded and it has added new members. From the initial 5 countries, today there are new members which have been added, from Ethiopia to Iran to United Arab Emirates and few others. So many countries are eager to join this economic grouping that represents the interests of the emerging, rising economies. So many countries are interested and Sri Lanka has also applied for it. And during the president's visit, Sri Lanka has asked for India's support, as India is a key member of BRICS. So that's why the statement becomes incorrect, because right now Sri Lanka is not a member of BRICS. It has applied for membership. It has been asking for India's support. So that's why I feel the statement is very relevant. So statement 2 becomes incorrect here. So right answer would be option C, 1 and 3 only. Now, let's dive a little deep into this topic. Let's look at Sri Lanka's location, understand its strategic significance for India. Let's get a brief background on what concerns and priorities does India have in Sri Lanka. And let's talk about Aruna Kumara Dissanayake, his rise to power, and what challenges and opportunities does it present for India. So Sri Lanka, as you can see in the map, lies at the very heart of the Indian Ocean region. It occupies a strategic location as it links West Asia with Southeast Asia. It can even connect Eastern Africa with South Asia. Sri Lanka has many strategic ports, including Colombo, the Hambantota port in southern Sri Lanka, the Trincomalee port in eastern Sri Lanka. They're all very vital for global shipping. The ships that traverse this region, which bring oil, gas, and other precious commodities, they dock at Sri Lankan ports, especially the Colombo port, which has state-of-the-art infrastructure. It's often compared with other major ports like Singapore, Dubai, etc. And it holds a lot of economic and strategic significance. In fact, India also has a dependency on Colombo port, as a lot of India's exports and imports passes through Colombo. And the rise of external powers in the region, such as China, the increasing Chinese military presence and diplomatic influence in Sri Lanka is something that bothers India, that affects Indian interests. So no wonder Sri Lanka has been a top priority for India. So let's understand what has Sri Lanka gone through recently, how India has helped Sri Lanka, and what would be the future of the relations now that there is a new government under a new leadership. See, Sri Lanka recently went through a devastating economic crisis. In 2022, it witnessed a massive economic crisis. It went bankrupt. There was a collapse of its forex reserves as Sri Lanka drained its forex reserves on these unsustainable loans. It fell into a debt burden as Sri Lankan governments had borrowed heavily from countries like China, India, Japan, and from the international markets. Due to economic mismanagement, wasteful expenditure, and illogical economic policies by the previous governments, Sri Lanka faced this dire economic situation. Its forex reserves were depleted. It couldn't sustain the necessary imports. This led to a shortage of essential items, triggering massive inflation in the country. So as Sri Lanka collapsed economically, it was India which came to the rescue. This was mentioned in the joint statement as well, when Sri Lankan President Dissanayake thanked India, as India has given up to $5 billion worth of assistance in the last 2 years. We have provided grants so that Sri Lanka can procure essential items from oil to medicines to food. We have provided new loans through lines of credit, which is a concessional loan offered by India. We have restructured some of the pending loans. India has given a flexible repayment period with lower interests so that Sri Lanka is not under immediate burden of repaying those loans to India. India has also worked with other creditors such as Japan and the Paris Club of Creditors to restructure the loans of Sri Lanka, and we have assisted Sri Lanka to get assistance through the IMF. The IMF has extended a bailout package and it has provided an extended fund of up to $3 billion, which has played a key role in reviving the Sri Lankan economy. So India has played this critical role in the last 2 years, and the Sri Lankan government has been grateful for the support India has given. And this was evident in the statements that were made by the new president of Sri Lanka. He thanked India for all the support and he urged India to continue this assistance so that Sri Lanka can revive and restructure its economy. Now, in this context, we should understand the rise of Dissanayake to power, because Anurag Kumara Dissanayake comes from a party known as the JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramunu. The JVP at one point was a radical militant organization which was aligned with left-wing extremism, inspired by extreme communism, and it was seen as a pro-China party essentially. If you go back to 1970s and 80s and look at the history of the JVP, it has a brutal, bloody history in Sri Lanka. This left-wing communist extremist radical outfit, it had committed large-scale atrocities. It was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent civilians. And at one point, it was seen as an anti-India extremist movement, given its pro-China alliance. China was seen to be behind the support given to the rise of this extreme communist organization in Sri Lanka. So India obviously had its reservations regarding the rise of JVP to power. See, today JVP has transformed itself into a mainstream political party. At one point, it was a radical extremist organization, but over the decades, it surrendered, it ended its violent phase, and it entered mainstream politics. But the rise of the party under Dissanayake in the last 15 to 20 years is something that is remarkable. Because in Sri Lanka, generally, there have been few traditional parties and leaders who have dominated Sri Lanka's politics. For example, the Rajapaksa brothers, Mahinda and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who have occupied seats of power repeatedly. Or if you look at leaders like Ranil Wickramasinghe, Maitripala Sirisena, and the parties they belong to. These traditional parties, which have had a lot of influence in Sri Lankan politics, they have often captured power, and these elitist leaders have often won elections in the country. But following the economic crisis after 2022, most of these parties and so-called elitist leaders, they lost popular support because the Sri Lankan people were angry, as the entire crisis was a result of economic mismanagement by successive governments and leadership. The Sri Lankan people blamed these elitist leaders. In fact, you might remember how Rajapaksa brothers were kicked out of power by the Sri Lankan people who rose up in rebellion in 2022 when the economic crisis broke out. So this marked the unpopularity of the traditional parties and the elitist leaders. So JVP under Dissanayake capitalized on these sentiments. At one point, JVP was a very minor political party, and Dissanayake was a largely unknown leader. So he built the ground support by exploiting the sentiments that was present in Sri Lanka. The sentiments created amongst the people during the economic crisis is something that was tapped by Anura Kumara Dissanayake and his party, the JVP, and eventually that contributed to his party sweeping the elections in the country. He not only swept the presidential polls and emerged as Sri Lanka's new president, but his party also swept the parliamentary elections that was held recently. So this highlights the rise of JVP and the coalition government formed under NPP, and it highlights the rise of Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a rising South Asian leader. So when Dissanayake won the popular vote as Sri Lanka's president and when his party swept the parliamentary elections, it did cause some concern in India that whether the party would protect Indian interests. Given the party's history and its traditional pro-China inclination and anti-India sentiments, there was some concern in New Delhi whether the new government under a new leader would protect India's influence and interests. Because of late, one major concern for India has been the rising presence of Chinese vessels, particularly the naval vessels of the PLA Navy. Chinese naval ships and even submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, have docked at Colombo port under the rule of Mahinda Rajapaksa and Godbaya Rajapaksa. We have seen Chinese so-called research vessels, which are essentially spy ships meant to carry out espionage, docking repeatedly at Hambantota port and Colombo port, which are strategic ports in Sri Lanka. India was worried when Sri Lanka allowed Chinese research vessels such as the Yongwong 5 to dock at Hambantota, as they have the capability to spy on India's satellite missions or missile tests and even intercept Indian communication. So this was seen as a strategic threat by India. So at the start of 2024, the previous Sri Lankan government under Ranil Wickremesinghe imposed a moratorium on the entry of foreign vessels to Sri Lankan ports. After India expressed concern about the presence of Chinese vessels, and India clearly highlighted this as a security threat, the previous Sri Lankan government, which was dependent on India for financial support, it placed a moratorium on the entry of any foreign research vessel to Sri Lankan ports. So this moratorium was valid only for 1 year, from January 1st, 2024 to the end of this year. So now India was worried that since there is a change in government, there is a new leader, whether Sri Lanka would uphold this commitment, whether the new Sri Lankan government would still keep out foreign research vessels, which have been a concern for India. So in this regard, the visit of Dissanayake and the commitments he has made becomes very, very crucial. After meeting Prime Minister Modi, Dissanayake has committed to protect India's interests, and he has clearly made a mention that Sri Lanka would not tolerate any kind of anti-India activities on its soil. So this is seen as an indirect message to the presence of China and other hostile actors, maybe including Pakistan, which have often misused Sri Lankan territory to create security challenges for India. Historically, Pakistan has tried using Sri Lanka as a terror base to cultivate a safe haven for terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba to target India. This has been a concern that India has flagged repeatedly. And the presence of Chinese naval ships, submarines, and research vessels, the spy ships, has been a concern flagged by India. So now this statement, this commitment coming from the new Sri Lankan president is great news for India. Essentially, he's committing that Sri Lankan soil will not be used against Indian interests, which goes a long way in addressing India's sensitivities and concerns. But however, we cannot take this as a guarantee, because even previous governments had made similar commitments. But still they ended up giving space for Chinese naval ships and spy vessels, which have been seen as a concern by India. So one needs to wait and watch whether Sri Lanka would live up to the commitment. But at least the fact that the Sri Lankan leader has addressed the concern and publicly stated that Sri Lankan territory will not be used against Indian interests is a big relief for India as it continues the stated policy between India and Sri Lanka, which is to protect each other's interests and not allow third parties and other countries to target each other's interests. So during this visit, The focus of both the leaders was obviously defense and security relations. A lot of new agreements have been signed to step up our defense and security cooperation. Joint military exercises will be further stepped up. See, India and Sri Lanka already have a joint military exercise known as Mitra Shakti. Apart from this, India and Sri Lanka are looking to step up their joint military exercises, including their navies and air force as well. Mitra Shakti is limited to the armies of India and Sri Lanka, but we would like to expand the military exercises to the other armed forces as well. And there have been few agreements that have been signed in this regard. Both countries have flagged maritime security as a top concern, and they have highlighted the various threats present in the Indian Ocean region, from piracy to organized crime to terrorism. All these concerns have been flagged, and India and Sri Lanka have agreed to work together to counter these threats, be it the traditional security threats or the non-traditional hybrid threats which are emerging. India and Sri Lanka will work together to ensure that Indian Ocean region remains free and stable, and that is what will protect the interests of both India and Sri Lanka. So important commitments have been made in this regard, and both countries have agreed to review their commitments made under Colombo Security Conclave. As I mentioned earlier, Colombo Security Conclave is an important security grouping started by India with Sri Lanka, with some of the other countries in the Indian Ocean. So please find out which are the other members and observers of this security-based grouping. India has also promised all the support needed for Sri Lanka's defense and security. This might mean India might even provide military equipment, because we have a history of providing aircrafts and helicopters for maritime surveillance and reconnaissance to other Indian Ocean countries like Maldives, Mauritius, etc. In the past, Sri Lanka has received military support and supply of weapons from India. So both sides have signed few agreements in this regard. And also, India is looking to expand the coastal surveillance radar to increase the coverage, the radar coverage in the Indian Ocean to deal with any traditional or non-traditional security threats. And Sri Lanka is playing host to some of the coastal radars. We have also installed some of these radars in Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles. So Sri Lanka would like to be part of this collaboration with India to enhance maritime security. So both sides have agreed that they will work together to share intelligence, to conduct joint patrolling if necessary, to conduct joint operations if necessary, and even to conduct reconnaissance and surveillance of their exclusive economic zones. So this has been the key highlight of the visit, the defense and security cooperation. Next, the other important issue for India has always been the well-being of the Tamil minorities. As you might know, the Tamil community in Sri Lanka has historically suffered due to the oppression, the targeted violence against the community, which has been unleashed by the radical Sinhala Buddhist forces with the backing of some Sri Lankan governments. This is what led to the ethnic war in the country that lasted for several decades, where we saw the rise of Tamil militant groups such as LTTE, which had devastated the country. Eventually, the civil war came to an end in 2009, and since then, attempts are being made to ensure the safety and well-being of Tamil minorities and to ensure their rehabilitation. Because Tamil minorities have been displaced by the 4-decade conflict. They have lost their livelihoods, they have been uprooted out of their homes, and they haven't received equal treatment under Sri Lanka's constitution. They haven't received equal rights. So this has been a priority for India to secure those rights, to secure the rehabilitation of Tamil minorities. Back in 1987, when India played the role of a mediator and we negotiated the India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord to bring this ethnic war to an end, India had ensured that Sri Lanka committed to a constitutional amendment, which was the 13th Constitutional Amendment. Under this peace accord, which was mediated by India, India promised to maintain the ceasefire between LTTE and the Sri Lankan forces by deploying the Indian peacekeeping forces. So Indian forces were deployed to maintain the ceasefire, to ensure LTTE doesn't breach the terms of the surrender under the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. In return, we had convinced the Sri Lankan government to secure equal rights and equal treatment to Sri Lankan Tamil minorities. So this included recognition of the Tamil language, which was done by the Sri Lankan government. But the most important constitutional change, which was pushed by India, was the 13th Amendment, which would provide for devolution of powers to the Tamil-dominated areas, so that provincial governments or provincial councils can be created in northern and eastern Sri Lanka, where the Tamil minorities are largely concentrated. So though Sri Lanka implemented the 13th Amendment, it was not a full implementation. Sri Lanka provided only for a partial implementation. Only few powers were delegated to the provincial councils. For example, key subjects like land, policing, and a few taxation powers, they were kept with the central government itself, and very few powers were devolved to these provincial councils. And also, regular elections were never conducted to these provincial councils. So India has been insisting on a full implementation, which means greater devolution of powers, including key subjects like land, police, law and order, etc., and regular frequent elections to these provincial councils, so that the rights of Tamil minorities can be protected and the Tamil minorities can have their own autonomous administration in these northern and eastern parts of Sri Lanka. But we have never seen a full implementation of this. That is something India has been pushing for from a long time. But however, if you look at Dissanayake and his political ideology and his party's stand on these issues, historically Dissanayake has been opposed to any further changes to the 13th Amendment. In fact, Dissanayake and his party have even opposed any further investigation on the alleged war crimes that were committed during the last phase of the civil war by the then Rajapaksa government. When the civil war was brought to an end between 2005 and 2009, the Sri Lankan army allegedly used disproportionate force under then President Mahinda Rajapaksa and then Defense Minister Godbaya Rajapaksa. The Sri Lankan army stands accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, and there has been a demand for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to secure justice and closure for the victims of this period of violence. But Sri Lanka has often denied these allegations, and Dissanayake and his party, they are also opposed to any further investigation regarding these alleged war crimes. They have even opposed any further changes to the 13th Amendment. So now India has been mindful of the stand of Dissanayake and his party. Until recently, until few months ago, we were strongly pushing for full implementation of 13th Amendment. We would explicitly mention that 13th Amendment has not been fully implemented. We would call for the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate the alleged war crimes and to rehabilitate the Tamil minorities. But this time, India has made a concession. Since we know that Dissanayake and his party are not aligned with this, and instead of pushing them against their wishes and pushing them into the hands of China, India has decided not to make explicit mention of these long-standing demands of India. So this is a break from India's traditional position. For many years, we've always reminded Sri Lanka of its commitment under 13th Amendment. We've always pushed for further investigations into the war crimes and the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But this time, India has dropped these references. Instead, PM Modi has only called for reconstruction of Sri Lanka. PM Modi has only referred to fulfilling the aspirations of Tamil minorities and full implementation of the Sri Lankan constitution as it exists. But we have skipped any explicit reference to further changes to the 13th Amendment. And we have skipped any reference to the war crimes and the push for investigations that India was previously pushing for. So this is a change in India's policy that you can notice. Since India had concerns about Dissanayake and his party's ideology and the pro-China inclination they have, maybe India has tried to go soft on this, not to press Sri Lanka on this, which might push Sri Lanka into the hands of China. So maybe this is a concession India is making, but this could even spell bad news for Tamil minorities. Tamil minorities would be concerned that India is no longer standing up for their cause and for their rights. But however, don't forget, India has a commitment towards Tamil minorities. We have invested heavily in northern and eastern provinces. India has built thousands of houses to rehabilitate the Tamil minorities who are displaced. India has several key projects, connectivity projects, economic projects in northern and eastern Sri Lanka, and they are all designed to benefit the Tamil community. So India does exert a positive influence on Sri Lanka to ensure the safety and well-being of the Tamils, but we have decided to make a concession here, maybe to balance out the Chinese influence and to ensure Dissanayike's government remains committed towards Indian interests. So this is one big change that you guys have to make a note of. Other than this, both sides have discussed the fishermen issue, which is a long-standing issue. Quite often, fishermen from Tamil Nadu, they resort to bottom trawling, which is an exploitative form of fishing that has led to the exhaustion of fishes on the Indian side. So frequently, Indian fishermen cross over into Sri Lankan waters, and this turns into a major diplomatic issue because the Sri Lankan Navy and Coast Guard, they often arrest the Indian fishermen. Sometimes they even open fire or target the Indian fishermen. Many times, Indian fishermen are detained for several months and years in Sri Lankan custody. There have been instances where Indian fishermen have been shot or even killed at the hands of Sri Lankan forces. Sometimes this has even led to clashes between Indian and Sri Lankan fishermen because Sri Lanka feels that Indian fishermen are stealing their resources, which is the case. This is against international law as well, because as per the UN clause provisions, according to UN Convention on Law of the Sea, the resources present in the exclusive economic zone of a country belongs to only that country. That country has sovereign rights over the economic resources. You can't have foreign elements poaching your resources. That is illegal, and the concerned country can take appropriate action. But the resort to violence and the aggressive behavior of the Sri Lankan forces is something that bothers India. Because in several instances, Indian fishermen have allegedly been mistreated. They have been subjected to violence, custodial torture. As I said, there have been killings of Indian fishermen as well, which becomes a very sensitive, emotional issue in Tamil Nadu. So India has brought up this issue, and both India and Sri Lanka have agreed to find a solution eventually. Because this is a long pending issue, which has been pending for many, many years. So Dissanayake has reminded India to ban bottom trawling, which is the root cause of the problem. India has not been able to enforce the ban on bottom trawling, as many Sri Lanka, Tamil Nadu fishermen, they still rely on bottom trawling even in Sri Lankan waters. So Sri Lanka has reminded India that it should clearly ban bottom trawling, which is a exploitative practice of fishing. And both sides have agreed to find a negotiated solution to ensure that such incidents do not happen, which can rupture the diplomatic ties. But it basically means there is no final solution as of now. Because this is a long-standing issue from 30-40 years, and even till now we haven't found a permanent solution. Right? So that remains a point of concern which has been flagged by both the sides. But the real achievement of this visit was with regard to the various agreements that have been signed. The economic, investment-based agreements, the digital energy connectivity projects that have been proposed. I think that should be the highlight of this visit. So let's take a quick look before we end this topic. Sri Lanka has become a key energy partner for India. India has proposed an electricity grid connecting South Asian economies. Our power grids are already connected with Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal. We would like to extend this grid connectivity to link with Sri Lanka as well. And there are key power projects that India is working on. There are key pipelines that have been proposed. And this includes a multi-product petroleum pipeline. India and Sri Lanka, along with United Arab Emirates, the three countries are going to set up a multi-product pipeline which can transport LNG and oil and gas from India to Sri Lanka. So UAE would be supplying the resources to India as part of our energy partnership. It would help India as well to construct this multi-product pipeline. And from Indian refineries, we will be supplying essential energy supplies to Sri Lanka. So this is a key highlight of the visit. India-Sri Lanka multi-product petroleum pipeline supplying LNG, oil, gas and other energy products which will support the Sri Lankan economy. Both sides have even discussed key projects including the railway signaling project and Kanke Senturai port. It is India which rebuilt the northern railway network in Sri Lanka, which had been destroyed by the civil war and by the 2004 tsunami. India had given a loan for this particular project. Recently, we funded a railway signaling system project as well. Now, India has decided to convert these loans into grants. So, Sri Lanka need not repay those loans to India. It reduces the debt burden on Sri Lanka. India had rebuilt the Kanke Senturai port in northern Sri Lanka, in Jaffna, which is vital for connectivity with India. Even this port had been damaged by the tsunami and by the civil war. And now India has already rebuilt this with a concessional loan. Now we are converting all these loans into grants. So Sri Lanka need not repay them. Plus, there is a fresh grant and a fresh loan India is extending for some of these projects, which are crucial for northern parts of Sri Lanka. Then, India is also involved in a thermal power plant and a solar plant at Sampur. Sampur is located in eastern Sri Lanka near Trincomalee port. So, Sri Lanka has reiterated its commitment. This is an old project. There's nothing new about this. It's an old project that we proposed in 2011. There have been a lot of to and fro with regard to this project, because some Sri Lankan governments which were hostile to India, like the Rajapaksa government, cancelled these projects and took off India from these projects. But now India has won back these projects under Ranil Wickremesinghe's government in the previous term. Now Dissanayake has committed again that India would be involved in these key projects, the Sampur coal and even solar project which will be set up in eastern Sri Lanka. But the bigger question was about the Western Container Terminal at Colombo Port. The West Container Terminal was a strategic project which was awarded to India's Adani Ports. See, previously, India was supposed to take up the Eastern Container Terminal port at Colombo along with Japan. The then Maitripala Sirisena government from 2015 to 2019, which was pro-India, had awarded a strategic project to India and Japan. We were supposed to take it up as part of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which is a joint initiative of India-Japan. But Rajapaksa government, which came back to power in 2019, they cancelled the project from India, gave this project to a Chinese company, highlighting the India-China competition. But as India has played a pivotal role in helping Sri Lanka during the crisis, the economic crisis, the Rajapaksa brothers, they tried to please India by awarding the West Container Terminal project to India's Adani ports. So this is a project India has been pushing from a long time. But given the recent controversy surrounding Adani Group, where it has faced corruption charges in the US, all these Adani projects around the world, which are being pushed by the Indian government, have come under scrutiny. Because see, at Colombo Port, the West Container Terminal was supposed to be financed with American support. This was a rare collaboration between India and US. US has an initiative called Millennium Challenge Corporation, through which it provides development finance funding. The US runs a development agency, the DFC, Development Finance Corporation, and under an initiative called Millennium Challenge Corporation, it funds such development initiatives in developing countries. The US was supposed to fund Adani Port terminal project at Colombo. So now that India-US relations are strained because of the allegations against Adani Group, and many Adani projects around the world have been reviewed and cancelled. For example, in Kenya, the Kenyan government cancelled the Nairobi airport project given the controversy surrounding Adani Group. Many other countries like Myanmar, Israel, where Adani was executing the Sitwe port and Haifa port projects, they have been taken up for review. So Sri Lanka has remained silent on this. Both India and Sri Lanka have not really mentioned the controversy. As of now, the US is unlikely to fund the Western Container Terminal. But what is clear is that India might go ahead. Adani Ports might continue with the Western Container Terminal at Colombo, which is a strategic project for India. So Sri Lanka has not cancelled the Indian project as of now. The only thing which has been a new development is that US is not going to fund the Western Container Terminal anymore. So Adani Group is likely to fund this on its own with support from Indian government. So this is a positive news for India. But however, Adani Power had won another key project in northern Sri Lanka. In northeastern Sri Lanka, near the Gulf of Mannar, at the small islands located near Mannar and Ponerian, there were new renewable energy projects, solar and wind projects, which had been given to a Chinese company. But after India opposed and protested against the Chinese involvement, because these projects would be very close to India's coastline near Tamil Nadu. So given the security strategic threat, India opposed these Chinese projects, and later Sri Lanka cancelled these Chinese projects and gave them to India. It was awarded to Adani Power. So now Sri Lanka is taking a relook, and reports are indicating that these solar and power projects, wind power projects, might be cancelled. The Dissanayake government may not award these projects to the Adani Group given the controversy, but it is likely to go ahead with only Western Container Terminal at Colombo Port. So these are some new developments, new changes that can define the future course of India-Sri Lanka relations. Other than this, India is going to help Sri Lanka in governance, in service delivery, in transforming the Sri Lankan economy into a digital economy. India has already rolled out the UPI to enable digital payments in the country, which can benefit both the sides. It can benefit our traders, our tourists, the Sri Lankan patients and students who come to India. And India is rolling out its public infrastructure, the public digital infrastructure in Sri Lanka. India has emerged as a leader in delivering e-governance through such public digital infrastructure initiatives such as Aadhaar or the GEM portal for government procurement, the PM Gati Shakti platform to monitor and implement infrastructure initiatives, the DigiLocker initiative to store digital documents, right? So India will be rolling out its experience, helping Sri Lanka implement its own digital public infrastructure, which will transform the governance and service delivery in Sri Lanka and help Sri Lanka switch to a digital economy. So this is where India is going to play a key role. Next, India will be training 1,500 Sri Lankan civil servants along with giving scholarships to Sri Lankan students. So this is part of our soft power initiatives. India trains foreign bureaucrats, police officers and diplomats from friendly countries. And this is a capacity building training program, which we have extended to Sri Lanka as well. And many students will receive scholarships in Indian colleges and universities. This is part of ITEC program, Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. Coming to the last point, the last major development which was reported. On the cultural front, see, India and Sri Lanka are deeply connected by Hinduism and Buddhism. Sri Lanka remains a Buddhist majority country. So the Sri Lankan president, as you can see his post on X, he visited Bodh Gaya and the Mahabodhi temple in Bihar, which is a sacred Buddhist pilgrimage site. Right? It's believed that Lord Gautam Buddha attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And Sri Lankan leaders have a history of visiting such shrines in India. And Anura Dissanayake also paid a visit to Bodh Gaya and the Mahabodhi temple. It highlights the strong cultural links offered through Hinduism and Buddhism. And we tap those religious cultural links in our diplomacy through the Ramayana Circuit and Buddhist Circuit initiative. India and Sri Lanka are working on a Ramayana Circuit to link the pilgrimage sites associated with Ramayana and to link the Buddhist pilgrimage sites to attract tourists and to build the cultural ties. Coming to connectivity and trade, as I told you in the prelims question, India and Sri Lanka recently launched a ferry service connecting Nagapattinam with Kanke Senturai. Along with that, the two countries are now taking up a new ferry service which has been proposed to link Rameshwaram with Talaimanar. So this is a new connectivity project which is going to be launched very soon. So very soon we will have two ferry services which are active, linking coastal Tamil Nadu with northern Sri Lanka. So please remember these places, right? The routes which are being connected. So that could be relevant for a prelims question, a map-based prelims question. So this completes my detailed analysis of the visit of Sri Lanka's president to India. So I hope all of you have understood these points. Please take up this mains question for your answer writing practice. How does the Sri Lankan government under the new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, present opportunities and challenges for India? Critically examine. So let's see how many of you can write a good answer to this question. Now, before I take up the second topic, we have another important announcement. Tomorrow, we have a new initiative which is being launched. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel, Abhishek Mishra sir will be taking up a one-stop video, a marathon session where he will discuss everything about World War I. I'm sure all of you know World War I is a key topic in world history and as well as with regard to international relations. So do ensure you attend this session live tomorrow at 8 p.m. and Abhishek sir will cover all the relevant aspects connected with the First World War. And if you guys support the initiative, we will continue this and have a similar session on Second World War as well. Now coming to the second topic. Something dramatic happened in Syria over the last couple of weeks. As you know, the Syrian regime under Bashar al-Assad has collapsed. So we need to quickly evaluate what happened, what were the developments, who are the major actors, and what are the implications of this development. How does it impact the West Asia region and the regional powers, and what could be the implications for India? So let's take a quick look. So before that, please take up this question. Which of the following groups were seen to be responsible for toppling Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria? The HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or Syrian National Army, or the Syrian Democratic Forces? What's the correct answer? Which of these groups, which were in the news, were involved which were directly responsible for toppling the Syrian regime under Bashar al-Assad? Many are saying A, some are saying B. But there's a tight contest between A and C. Okay, let's see what's the correct answer. The HTS and the Syrian National Army. 1 and 2 only. These were the rebel factions which were involved in targeting Assad's regime and toppling the government of Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian Democratic Forces, on the other hand, were not involved. Clear? So let's understand this. Let's take a quick look. So to understand what happened in Syria, you need a quick background. See, back in 2010, 2011, across Middle East and North Africa, there was a pro-democracy revolutionary movement that spread from one country to another, starting from Tunisia to Egypt to Libya to other countries. This was essentially a movement against dictators, against authoritarian regimes, which are seen across Middle East, North Africa region. So this movement eventually engulfed Syria as well. Syria, as you know, is a Sunni majority country ruled by the Shia minority. Within Shia Islam, there is a sect called the Alawite sect, primarily found in coastal areas of Syria, and the Assad family comes from the Alawite sect. So some of the Sunni groups in Syria have often opposed Assad's regime. In different parts of Syria, there are different players in southern, northern, eastern parts, right? There are different factions and militant groups and rebels which have often opposed the dictatorial regime of Bashar al-Assad. Because Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, has been in power from 1971. So basically for more than 5 decades, the Assad family has ruled the country, where Shia minorities have ruled over a largely Sunni majority population. So this has been a sectarian divide that has been present in the country. But however, under the Assad family, until 2010, Syria was a stable country. Its economy was prosperous. Bashar al-Assad's father had built strong institutions. He had even addressed the divides between the Shias and Sunnis, brought them together, and the country was largely stable, even though Assad was a dictator who was running authoritarian regime. Because even his son Bashar al-Assad was known to target his dissidents and opponents and use a brutal force against them. Right? Syria's prisons are evidence of that, where these custodial tortures and killings would take place. So despite the authoritarian dictatorial regime, the country was a stable country, a stable economy. But Syria emerged as a key ally of regional Shia power, Iran. Given that Assad family was from the Alawite sect, the radical Shia regime in Iran obviously shared close links and backed and supported the Assad regime. So Iran and Syria formed an axis in the region, extending their influence into Iraq and Lebanon. And this represented the Shia power bloc in West Asia. This was rivaled by the Sunni power bloc led by major Sunni powers, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the other GCC countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar to an extent, and others, all aligned under the Sunni power bloc. So there is an age-old rivalry between these countries. Now, this nexus between Iran and Syria has led to a threat for Western interests. External powers like United States, which are aligned with Sunni powers, even some European countries which are aligned with the Sunni powers, they have often seen Iran and Syria and their Shia nexus as a threat, because these countries have been aligned with Russia. Russia has been a key supporter of the Iranian regime and as well as the Assad regime in Syria. So there is a global dimension to this. Iran has used Iraq and Lebanon to cultivate its own proxy groups, non-state extremist proxies such as Hezbollah. And Syria has been pivotal in extending that support to Hezbollah. So in Iraq, there are factions of Hezbollah like Kataib Hezbollah. The main branch of Hezbollah is based out of Lebanon, which has been in the news recently. So Iran would provide all the training, funds and weapons to Hezbollah primarily through Syria. Syria was like a corridor, a trade route or a connectivity route linking Iran with Lebanon. And that is what maintained the Iranian covert support to groups like Hezbollah. Iran even nurtured many other extremist groups in the region, including Hamas in Gaza Strip, to target its prime rival, Israel. Iran and Israel have an age-old rivalry going on between them, especially since 1979. And Iran has even sponsored the Houthis in Yemen, targeting American, Israeli and Sunni interests. So you can see how the region has been divided between regional and global powers, with US, the West basically, aligned with Israel and Sunni powers, and Iran and Syria aligned with Russia, which has allowed Iran to cultivate several proxy groups which have been targeting Israel and American interests and Sunni interests. So this has been the regional conflict. So when the Arab Spring movement spread across the region, external powers like US and Sunni powers, they exploited the situation and they sponsored the rebels in Syria to use this opportunity to carry out regime change. They sponsored some of the rebels against the Syrian regime, including few Sunni groups. And the US was directly involved, along with few Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia and even regional powers like Turkey, which has been trying to create a space for itself. They were all involved in backing the Free Syrian Army, which was the primary rebel faction against Assad's regime. Later, the US was alleged to be supporting a terrorist entity called Al-Nusra Front, which was aligned with Al-Qaeda. So these factions were supported by the rivals of Assad's regime to use the Arab Spring momentum to throw out Assad's regime and thus weaken Iran and Russian influence. So this led to the civil war in the country. Syria descended into this conflict from 2011 onwards. Eventually in 2015, Russia itself carried out a direct military intervention because Russia has strategic military bases in Syria. Russia is not only a key ally of Iran and Syria, but it has vital military bases, a naval base, the Tartus naval base, and a key air base, the Latakia air base that faces the Mediterranean Sea. This gives Russia influence in the Mediterranean, which can project military power all the way up to Atlantic Ocean as well. So to protect its allies and its own influence and military presence, Russia intervened and conducted airstrikes, deployed troops, and supported Assad's regime with Iran. Iran brought in its proxies such as Hezbollah from Lebanon and Iraq to support Assad against these rebels. So this is how the civil war transpired. And by 2016, Assad managed to recover territory, mainly due to the support given by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. Parallelly, the Islamic State rose to prominence in eastern Syria and parts of Iraq. In fact, at one point, the leaders who would later establish ISIS and Al-Nusra, they were all related to each other. If you look at Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the founder of Islamic State, who declared himself as the so-called Caliph, he was linked with al-Julani, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who's currently the leader of HTS, which has thrown out Assad's regime. And HTS is nothing but Al-Nusra Front previously. The Al-Nusra Front, which I mentioned, which was a faction of Al-Qaeda sponsored by US and Turkey and others at one point, has now transformed itself into HTS. It has broken itself from Al-Qaeda. But previously, Al-Julani and Baghdadi were connected. In fact, Al-Julani was one of the commanders who was very close to Baghdadi. It was Baghdadi who sent Al-Julani to establish a Al-Qaeda branch in Syria to target Assad's regime. and help the rebels to topple Assad's regime. But later, Baghdadi founded Islamic State in Iraq and captured the territory in Iraq and Syria. And al-Julani fell apart and transformed al-Nusra Front into HTS and broke his connections with Al-Qaeda. So this has been a very complex situation in the region, where there are multiple players, multiple rebel factions involved with their own interests, their own agendas. So the war had reached a stalemate by 2016-2017 because of the intervention of Russia. Parallelly, US carried out a big military intervention to target ISIS as ISIS became a global threat. The US sponsored the local Kurdish groups such as the YPG, which is part of the Syrian Democratic Forces. And with the help of these Kurdish militias, the US targeted ISIS and neutralized ISIS and contained Islamic State to small pockets of Iraq and Syria. So as a result, the situation had reached a stalemate and Assad managed to regain the territory and control, and thus Syria had become relatively stable. But now the opportune time came up because Assad's allies were at their weakest. They have been distracted. Russia has been distracted in Ukraine. It has been targeted by the West through its sanctions. Then Iran is probably at its weakest since 1979, given its direct conflict with Israel and covert war, which it has been fighting with Israel. All the proxies of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis have been weakened ever since the Gaza war broke out. Israel has decimated Hamas and its leadership in Gaza. Israel has almost wiped out Hezbollah in Lebanon and its entire leadership. Right? It has even weakened the Houthis in Yemen through repeated military strikes. Even US and UK have been targeting Houthi positions in Yemen. And thus, on all fronts, Iran had been weakened because its proxies had been weakened. Plus, Israel has mounted direct attacks on Iran, including airstrikes. So clearly, Iran was on the back foot. Hezbollah had been almost wiped out, and Russia was distracted. So this was the weakest moment, as Assad couldn't rely on support from traditional allies. And that is what HTS has exploited. And who's behind HTS? It's largely seen to be Turkey, which is sponsoring HTS and another rebel faction known as the Syrian National Army. Now please look at the map here. The areas in red was largely controlled by Assad's government. This was the territory that was regained by Assad with the help of Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. But within days, within hardly a week, Assad has lost this entire territory. It took more than 4 years for Russia, Iran to help Assad to regain this territory, and Assad lost this within few days, hardly 4 to 5 days. How did this happen? This happened because the HTS, which has a major presence in northwestern Syria, started regrouping with support and sponsorship from Turkey. The HTS quickly captured major cities like Idlib, Aleppo, which was the stronghold of HTS, and made advances towards Damascus and other areas controlled by the Syrian government. And this was supported by a few Sunni groups from the south. Few Sunni rebels in the south. They were sponsored by Jordan, the neighboring country, which also wanted to topple Assad's regime, as Jordan is aligned with US. So it is this rebel faction and the coalition of these rebels which mainly made inroads towards Damascus. But parallelly, there was another group in the northern parts of Syria called the Syrian National Army, which is nothing but a new version of Free Syrian Army. Remember, I told you Free Syrian Army was largely sponsored by US, Sunni powers like Saudi Arabia and Turkey as well, initially. But now, the Free Syrian Army has transformed into Syrian National Army operating here along the Turkish-Syria border, and Turkey has played this role in sponsoring this rebel faction as well. See, Turkey's main interest here is to create a space for itself between the Sunni and Shia powers and become a major regional power, and more importantly, to target the Kurds. The entire area here, shaded in yellow, is controlled by Kurdish militias. So in Syria, Kurdish groups like YPG, right? It's a Kurdish militant group. It had struck a peace accord with Syria's regime, Assad's government, and it had got a limited autonomy here. So the Kurds present in Syria were backing other Kurdish groups in Turkey and neighboring Iraq and Iran, and supporting other Kurdish militant groups like PKK, which have been targeting Turkey, because their end goal is to liberate all Kurdish areas to form a separate country called Kurdistan. So Turkey sees the Kurdish groups as a threat. It wanted to counter and target the Kurd groups and of course topple Assad's regime, which had in a way supported the Kurdish militias in Syria. So that is why Turkey has used HTS and the Syrian National Army, sponsored them to not only target Assad's regime, but Syrian National Army has been used to target the Kurd militia such as the YPG. The Kurd groups in Syria are organized under Syrian Democratic Forces. So basically in this entire conflict, right, there are major stakeholders. The Syrian Democratic Forces are nothing but the Kurd groups which were in a way aligned with Assad's regime. But Turkey has used other groups like HTS and Syrian National Army to target not only Assad's government but also the Kurd groups. And that is why the government quickly collapsed. Because there was a mounted assault from the north, west, east and south. There were many external players involved, including other Sunni powers, to an extent US, Jordan, and Iran was at its weakest, which couldn't support Assad's regime. Russia was distracted. Hezbollah had been wiped out. So given that Assad had no allies to rely on, no support, the rivals of Assad have exploited the situation at the right time and quickly toppled the regime. So now what happens next? See, Israel has already established a dominating control here. It not only occupies the Golan Heights that you can see here. Israel has occupied Golan Heights from 1967, since the Six-Day Arab War. Now it has occupied the buffer zone as well over here. Israel has moved its troops to the buffer zone, which was manned by the UN peacekeeping forces. It has taken control of the buffer zone and conducted major military strikes in Syria to destroy the military infrastructure. Because Israel's fear is that the weapons of the Syrian army might fall into the hands of the terror groups, which might target Israel later. So though HTS has said that it wants to provide for a regime change and a smooth transition, right? Israel has no faith in these groups, which might resort to terrorism against Israel. It has conducted deadly military strikes in the last 14 days to wipe out the military infrastructure, mainly the large weapons, the missiles and the chemical weapons, which were there under Assad's army. So this has been a target and Israel has been dominating this entire region. Now this marks a big victory for Turkey. It clearly establishes Turkey as a key regional power, and without a doubt, it marks the decline of Iran. If not the end of Iran's influence, it is definitely the weakest moment for Iran as far as its regional influence is concerned. Because all its proxies are almost wiped out and weakened. Its biggest ally, Syria, and Assad's government have been thrown out. So this represents the lowest point for Iran since 1979. So this might fundamentally change the geopolitics of the region. That's why it's a ground-shaking development. This could have big implications for India. As I said, Syria has been this connection across the Levant region, which enabled Iran to exercise influence and sponsor all these groups covertly. IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the covert armed branch of Iran, and its elite secretive unit, the Quds Force, they have been using Syria and the support from Assad's government to support groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and other entities which have been targeting US and Israeli interests. So now Iran loses that influence, because without a favorable regime in Syria, Iran cannot easily support factions of Hezbollah and other entities which target the rivals of Iran. Now this might push Iran to accelerate its nuclear program. Because now that Iran is being pushed into a corner on all the fronts, it might push Iran to take the last resort to accelerate its nuclear weapons program, which might add a new dimension to the tensions in West Asia. Because US, Israel and the Sunni powers are strongly opposed to Iran's nuclear program. Right? They've even targeted Iran's nuclear program in the past, not only through economic sanctions, but also through military strikes and covert attacks. So we might see a flare-up of the nuclear tensions as Iran will desperately pursue nuclear weapons, because now its closest ally, Assad, is gone. Its proxies are weakened, almost wiped out. So out of desperation, if Iran tries to accelerate the nuclear program, there are reports already that Iran is trying to do that. So US, Israel and the Sunni powers might step up their attacks, and it might lead to fresh tensions. So Turkey's role is very clear, very evident. Turkey has hoodwinked everyone. Even its closest ally, US, was largely unaware until it became too late, right? And though US is happy with the removal of Assad, it's not entirely comfortable with the rising role and influence of Turkey. Though both are NATO allies, US has its own concerns about Turkey under Erdogan, because Turkey is trying to assert itself, which could set a chain of events in the region which could become uncontrollable, because Turkey is at conflict in a way with the Shia powers, the Sunni powers, and in a way with Israel as well, right? So this is a complex dynamic where Turkey is expressing support for groups targeting Israel, whereas Turkey at the same time is sponsoring groups to weaken Iran's influence, and it's trying to counter other Sunni powers as well. So this is a very complex dynamic, and the rise of Turkey will definitely have a big impact on the dynamics of the region. So other Sunni powers like Saudi and UAE would try to cement their position. They would try to build ties with other rebel factions, maybe even terrorist groups. There are allegations that these countries were involved in sponsoring Al-Qaeda and factions of Al-Qaeda such as Al-Nusra Front. Countries like Qatar have a history of sponsoring extremist groups to fulfill their own agendas, their own interests. So we might see a further increase in such covert wars where every regional power will try to play their own game, and parallelly Israel will try to assert its position. It will try to ensure that these groups don't pose a threat, and it will blatantly carry out these covert attacks and military strikes across the region, which can easily escalate into a bigger conflict. Western powers, they would be happy for now because they are seeing the decline of Russian and Iranian influence. US in particular would be more than happy, right? Especially the incoming Trump administration would welcome the weakening of Iran, but Russia again may not take this lying down. Russia and Iran may regroup, and they might try to counter the Western role and Western influence, and might counter Israel and the Sunni powers. So it's a very complex but interesting development. But definitely West Asia will not be the same. With Assad's regime toppled and all the developments that have happened in the last 1 year, West Asia has changed forever. And this has deep implications for India. Because these tensions, conflicts, escalation of a bigger war, it could threaten our energy supplies. Because India is heavily dependent. Nearly 60% of our crude oil, a large percentage of our natural gas comes from West Asian countries. Any wider conflict here could destabilize the supply chains. We have a very large Indian community here. Millions of Indians reside and work across these countries. Their safety, well-being could be threatened. And we have good relations with almost all of them. Be it Russia and US, right? We are good friends with both of them, but it places India in the middle, in between Russia and US. If you look at the Shia Sunni powers and Israel, India wants to have good ties with all of them. We do have great relations, but balancing them becomes a challenge. We are worried Israel would get offended if India stands with Iran. We are worried Iran will take offense if we stand with Israel or US or with Sunni powers, right? And India-Turkey already have a complex relationship, as Turkey has aligned itself with Pakistan, and it has even bothered India by interfering in our internal matters over Kashmir and other internal issues. So it does create new complications for India. The further rise of Turkey could give it a more greater influence at United Nations, at OIC, and Turkey with Pakistan could bring more pressure on India. That is something that India will look out for. But parallelly, we would try to protect our own influence and interests. So it is indeed a developing situation. So we can't really conclusively say what might happen. But one thing is for sure, West Asia will not remain the same. So that is why it's a key development. So please take up this practice question. The fall of Assad's regime has deep implications for West Asia. Evaluate. Now let's look at the next topic from IR. Why China has banned export of some rare minerals to the US. It's a small topic. We can cover this quickly, but it is a very important development. So let's start with a question. Rare minerals such as gallium, germanium, antimony primarily find application in which industry? Are they used primarily in computers and electronics industry, or in defense and space technology, or renewable energy? In which sector do these rare minerals find a primary application? Can you tell me the right answer? The poll is live. All of you who are watching, please attempt the poll. Let's see how many of you can answer this. Majority of them are saying D. Very good. Option D is indeed correct. These rare minerals are used widely across all these three industries. They are in fact critical minerals in these industries. So let's understand what are these minerals. Why are they rare? What is their application in the industry? Why are they considered as strategic critical minerals? And why there is a fight between China and US? See, China, I'm sure you know, controls the supply chain of most of the rare and critical minerals. It has a dominating control over some of the supplies of rare and critical minerals. And this includes gallium, germanium, and antimony. Now let's look at the science behind this and let's look at the technological application behind this. Then we will come to the geopolitical angle. Gallium with atomic number 31, it's a soft silvery white metal, very similar to aluminium. But it has a wide application in computers, electronics, defense, space, and renewable energy. Because its melting point is just above room temperature, which is perfect for certain applications in all these strategic industries. Germanium with atomic number 32, it's a grayish white metalloid. Metalloid is basically a substance which is a semi-metal. And this itself, the unique structure, the texture, the properties of this particular mineral gives it unique applications. Its brittle nature makes it very useful in several industries for industrial applications. Antimony with atomic number 51 is a hard, brittle, silvery metalloid. Again, finding application across these strategic industries. Now take for example, in computers, defense, renewable energy, germanium is very important for manufacturing solar cells, the semiconductor wafer chips, right, which are used in various key industries. The photovoltaic solar cells, which is so crucial in the renewable energy market. The semiconductor chips, which are crucial in electronics, defense, aerospace. They all rely on germanium, mainly because of its unique properties. Gallium arsenide is believed to make solar wafers more efficient because of its ability to run at higher frequency and its heat-resistant capabilities. If you look at the semiconductor manufacturing industry, the chip manufacturing industry, across the chip manufacturing industry, these rare minerals find a key application. Right? So rare minerals are definitely of critical strategic value. Germanium is also used in infrared, optical fiber manufacturing, antimony especially because of its hard, brittle nature. It's widely used in defense, mainly for ammunition manufacturing, to manufacture bullets, armor piercing weaponry, etc. So you can see clearly that these minerals, which are very rarely available, they are rare earth minerals because of their less concentration, right? They're not easily available in every part of the world. Very few countries are blessed with these rare minerals. And China controls most of the supply chain. China is not only blessed with some of the rare minerals, but it controls most of the production, the mining, eventual supply as well. Now, US and China have already entered into a trade war. They have been weaponizing their economic dominance. Both US and China have been targeting each other, punishing each other, right? They've been waging this economic trade war with a geopolitical intention. So this has been going on across economic domains, across technological domains. Look at the fight between US and China with regard to artificial intelligence or 5G, 6G communication networks. Clearly, the economic fight has a geopolitical angle behind it. US doesn't want Chinese companies to dominate key emerging technologies like AI or 5G, 6G communication. China, US have been waging cyber wars against each other, trying to spy on each other, trying to steal each other's intellectual property, trying to steal classified information from each other. So what you see in the economic domain has now translated into a larger strategic geopolitical competition between them. Recently, US President Joe Biden, he unleashed a few measures to punish China. For example, Biden signed off an administrative note which prohibits the export of certain chips and certain machinery, which is critical for semiconductor manufacturing, from being exported to China. The US President Joe Biden placed a ban on any export that could head towards China as far as few semiconductor chips, few critical chips are concerned, and critical machinery needed in the semiconductor industry. So this is the chip war which is going on between US and China. And parallelly, Joe Biden has restricted 100 plus Chinese companies and placed them on the restricted trade list, meaning they cannot access the American market. They have been restricted from accessing the American market on national security grounds, because these Chinese companies have been listed as a security threat because of their close connection with Chinese security and intelligence agencies. So, following this recent move by President Biden, China has now retaliated by banning the export of 3 strategic rare minerals, gallium, germanium, and antimony, on which American industry is heavily dependent. The Western industry, right, across computers, electronics, defense, space, aerospace, and clean renewable energy, which are all critical sectors today, they all have a great dependency on these rare minerals, and China controls most of the market. 80% of gallium production supply is with China. 60% of world's germanium production and supply is controlled by China. So look at the dominating control and presence China has with regard to the production and supply of these rare minerals. So if China decides to ban these exports, which it already has done, this will deal a significant blow to the US market, especially to the key industries in US and Western world. This will be a significant blow. And also please understand, China is preparing for the next presidency under Donald Trump. If China finds Biden to be hostile, then Trump would be even more hostile towards China. Trump has always openly stated that China is enemy number 1 for the United States. During his previous presidency, Trump had already targeted China with a trade war by levying high import tariffs, by restricting Chinese companies from accessing the American market. Clearly, the economic war had a geopolitical angle behind it. So now, with Trump all set to take over the presidency in a few weeks, China is preparing for it. So China's move to ban the export of these rare minerals should be seen in this context. One, it is a retaliation for what President Biden did by banning export of certain chips and machinery in the semiconductor industry and placing Chinese companies on a restriction list. And it is also preparation for Trump to create difficulties for Donald Trump right from the beginning, because Trump will clearly be more hostile to China, and China is already taking those retaliatory measures. So this is something that could affect the global supply chains as well. This is something that could affect India as well. Given how China has often weaponized its trade advantages, its economic dominance, this is something that has always worried India. India also depends on China for supply of these critical rare minerals. So since China looks at India as an American ally, and China is known to target India as well because of its closeness with the US, this will have implications for India. The overall disruption in critical supply chains and how China weaponizes its dominating control, right, is something that worries everyone. So it's not just an economic fight. There is a clear geopolitical angle which can have strategic implications. So please take up this mains question. China's weaponization of critical supply chains is a major concern. Discuss. You need to give examples, as we did, right? There are many such instances where India also has taken a hit because of China's weaponization of its trade advantages. For example, if you look at India-China trade relationship, China has a huge trade surplus. We have a big trade deficit. China leverages this to its advantage. It leverages the fact that India has an import dependency on China, and it uses this to gain strategic advantages over India. So this is something that has always concerned India. So these developments are related to the same. And you need to be aware of how China weaponizes its trade and economic advantages for geopolitical gains, how it can disrupt the global markets and supply chains, how it can affect interests like the countries of India. Now, We have completed the IR topics. Let's quickly move towards internal security and disaster management, and we can wrap up the session for today. We have this article in Indian Express, which I found to be very interesting, related to CAPFs, Central Armed Police Forces, and the representation of women in our CAPFs. So let's dive into this topic. It's relevant both for prelims and mains. But first, let's take a practice question. Which of the following is not a Central Armed Police Force? There are four options. Which amongst the four is not a CAPF? Assam Rifles, CISF, SPG, or ITBP? What's the correct answer? Please let me know. So first we will learn about CAPFs. What are CAPFs? What's their role? How many CAPFs are there? Right? And then we'll discuss the representation of women in our Central Armed Police Forces. It's a key topic, both for prelims and mains in internal security. Very good. Many of them are saying C. C is indeed the correct answer. The Special Protection Group is not a CAPF. The SPG, which is responsible for proximate security to the Prime Minister and his or her immediate family, it functions under the Cabinet Secretariat. It's not a CAPF. It's an elite proximate security group meant for protecting the PM and his or her immediate family, right? So which are the CAPFs? The CAPFs are basically the police forces of the center. See, as per the Indian Constitution, policing, public order is a state subject. So police comes under the state government. State governments have state police forces maintaining law and order, right? Enforcing the law. So this is a state matter. Policing is a state matter essentially, but the union will also play a role when it comes to interstate problems, when it comes to internal security threats, border management, border security. The central government will have a critical role over here. The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for internal security. So the center maintains a set of armed police forces of its own, which are basically the CAPFs. These are paramilitary forces of India, paramilitary organizations. They come in between our armed forces and police forces. Armed forces like Army, Navy, Air Force, they are meant for external enemies to fight wars, right? They have heavy equipment. They're trained to kill. They're mainly meant for offensive operations against the enemy. Police forces at the state level, on the other hand, they are more sensitized forces. They carry minimal weapons. They use force as a last resort. They are meant to maintain law and order, right? To investigate cases, to prevent riots, to prevent unrest. And they carry minimal weapons, use force as a last resort. Whereas armed forces, they are trained to use force as the first option, right? They're basically trained to kill as they deal mainly with external enemies and external threats of India. Now, sometimes in between, you need a force, a paramilitary force, which brings the best of the armed forces and police forces. You need the lethality, the training, the better weapons and equipment of the armed forces, and you need the sensitization of the police. That is where CAPFs come in, the paramilitary forces. They bring in the lethality of the armed forces, the superior training and weapons. At the same time, they bring in the sensitivity of the police. So they are used in a wide variety of roles. So under the Home Ministry, these are the listed CAPFs. There are 7 Central Armed Police Forces. Assam Rifles, many of them confuse Assam Rifles to be a part of the Indian Army. They think it's a battalion or a unit under the Indian Army, but it's not. It's a CAPF. It's a standalone paramilitary force. The confusion arises because in Northeast India, as far as counterinsurgency operations are concerned under AFSPA, Assam Rifles has been placed under the command of Indian Army, only operational command. That is only with regard to counterinsurgency operations. But every other aspect of Assam Rifles is with the Home Ministry. So Indian Army and Defense Ministry have operational command only with regard to counterinsurgency operations in Northeast India. But Assam Rifles, which guards the borders with Myanmar, so its border security role, its recruitment, training, cadre management, everything else is with Home Ministry. Home Ministry is the parent cadre ministry, the cadre controlling ministry. So there is a dual control. That's why the confusion arises. But it's a CAPF. It's placed under the operational command of the Army and Defense Ministry only for the sake of counterinsurgency operations. So it's a separate CAPF meant for guarding India-Myanmar border. The BSF, the world's largest border guarding force that guards our borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh. The CISF, a specialist industrial security force, which provides security to critical infrastructure from airports to metro stations to power plants, dams, and other key buildings and strategic locations. CRPF, Central Reserve Police Force, which is used in internal security situations. It's the primary anti-Naxal force deployed in Naxal-infested states to supplement the state forces to counter Naxalism. Then deployed in Jammu and Kashmir as well to assist Indian Army in counterinsurgency, counter-terrorism, to maintain law and order and maintain stability in Jammu and Kashmir to deal with riots. It's also deployed in Northeast India, specifically in Manipur recently, for example, to deal with the ethnic unrest. So CRPF is a specialist force that deals with such internal security challenges. ITBP, specifically meant for guarding the border with China. It specializes in high altitude warfare. It can operate in the challenging environment of the Himalayas, right? The terrain, the climate, the weather is very challenging in the Himalayan border. ITBP specializes in such deployments. Then NSG, National Security Guards, the Black Cat Commandos, right? It's a elite counter-terrorist unit, a special force unit of the Home Ministry meant for anti-hostage, anti-hijack situations. It specializes in urban warfare, close quarter combat, to take on terrorists who are holding hostages, who have hijacked a plane or a bus or a vehicle, right? So NSG specializes in such counter-terrorism roles. Then SSB, a border guarding force guarding the borders with Nepal and Bhutan. These are the CAPFs of India. So some of them are border guarding forces, as you can see. Some of them have a specialist role. They have a niche role which has been assigned to them. And they are also used for other purposes, for, let's say, managing elections, to provide security during the conduct of elections. They also play a role during disasters. In fact, all CAPFs have contributed a couple of battalions to make up the NDRF. Except for NSG, other CAPFs have contributed 2 battalions to constitute the NDRF, National Disaster Response Force. So CAPFs play a very versatile role in the country's security and stability. So ensuring the adequate representation of women in such critical forces is very crucial. Having gender representation is very, very critical. But right now, the numbers are alarming. This topic is in news because there have been questions raised in the parliament, in the Lok Sabha. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs has looked at the issue, and recently the Minister of State for Home Affairs submitted data in the Lok Sabha, which gives us insight regarding women representation in our CAPFs. According to the data, one positive point is that the number of women officers from the constable level to the senior officers level within our CAPFs has tripled in the last decade. In 2014, including all 7 CAPFs, we had 15,499 women officers in CAPFs. This has almost tripled to 42,000 and above in 10 years. So this increase, this 3x increase, is indeed an encouraging number. But if you look at the percentage of women in each force, it is abysmally low. It is extremely low. The average is at 4.4%. We have close to 1 million troops and officers amongst all the CAPFs combined. Out of them, hardly 4.4% on average are women. The highest representation is within CISF, Central Industrial Security Force, where women representation is at 7.02%. So no wonder when you see CISF at your airports and metro stations, you will see a significant number of women officers because they have recruited more women. But other forces, especially border guarding forces, they have struggled. BSF, ITBP, Assam Rifles, CRPF, which are deployed in more challenging circumstances and situations, they have very, very low women representation. Just 4.43% in SSB, 4.41 in BSF, 4.05 in ITBP, 4.01 in Assam Rifles, 3.38 in CRPF. So these numbers are very, very low. So the Parliamentary Committee on Home Affairs has looked into this issue. The government has tried taking certain measures as well. So we need to identify what are the root causes. Why women are not adequately represented? Is there a deliberate discrimination within these forces? Or are there any entry barriers which are preventing women from aspiring for a job in these services? That is what we need to examine. See, definitely, given the difficult nature of the duty performed by these forces, several women don't really aspire for a role in these services. And also, the government has not really created a lucrative environment. It hasn't incentivized women enough. There are several entry barriers, which is a ground reality, which was brought out even by the Parliamentary Committee on Home Affairs. To address them, in 2016, the Home Ministry gave a specific direction to all CAPFs to increase women representation. The government laid down a criteria that in CRPF and CISF, the government was looking to have at least a third of all constable level positions to be kept reserved for women, and at least 14 to 15% vacancies at constable level in border guarding forces to be kept for women. Even though this was an ambitious target, the recruitment has not matched the policy target. The CAPFs haven't done enough recruitment. They haven't been able to encourage and instill enough interest and passion amongst women aspirants to enter these CAPFs. The actual numbers have fallen way below the target. Even though this ambitious target was set in 2016, we have added hardly around 30,000 plus women into the CAPFs. In the last decade, we have tripled the number. It might look like a very impressive number, but if you look at the overall representation, it's still very, very low. Hardly 30,000 plus women have been added in the last decade, whereas lakhs of men have joined the CAPFs. So this is a clear gender gap that is present. So what are the entry barriers present? What can be done to increase women representation? Let's take a quick look. See, the Parliamentary Committee on Home Affairs had directed the government a few years ago to initiate certain steps to identify the entry barriers. One, of course, is the challenging conditions present in the border areas, in the remote areas. The committee identified the difficult terrain, the difficult nature of the job itself, the risk faced at the hands of criminal cartels or insurgents or terrorists in a conflict zone is something that deters women. Again, this is not to cast any aspersion on the bravery, on the courage of women, but in general, it becomes a disincentive. And also the government has failed to create a lucrative environment, a safe environment for women officers. Even if you look at the facilities, right, it hasn't been adequate enough, from the availability of restrooms to specific health care, right, especially during maternity and post-pregnancy child care. The adequate facilities have not been made available, right? That is something the government has tried to work upon. So in recruitment itself, the government has to promote the initiatives the government has for women, the facilities the CAPFs are creating for women, and encourage them to create that aspiration in them so that they are encouraged to join the services in larger numbers. So even the Committee on Personnel, Public Grievances, Law and Justice, they had a recommendation in this regard. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Personnel, Public Grievances and Law and Justice, these two committees had also recommended that maybe we should offer more soft postings to women. Again, don't take this the wrong way. This was not a question on the bravery and courage of women officers. This was about encouraging more women who may not aspire for difficult postings. Given the difficult challenges women face in our patriarchal society, right? The family burden which is there on them, many women will obviously not aspire for such hard postings in a remote border area where there is no safety for them, where they don't have basic provisions, basic facilities. It is challenging. That is a ground reality, which was flagged by the parliamentary committees as well. So they recommended that soft posting should be given, maybe at headquarters, or desk jobs can be given, right? Or postings where women handle communication, intelligence, etc., where they're not deployed in the front lines, in the hard border areas. So that was a recommendation which has been taken up by the government. The government and Home Ministry and the CAPFs have been trying to create these favorable conditions where more openings can be created in softer roles, where required facilities, incentives can be created. So for example, right from recruitment till posting, lot of women-friendly initiatives have been implemented by the CAPFs. If you look at the entry exams, application fee has been waived off For women aspirants, it's free. And the physical standards and physical efficiency test, the standards have been lowered so that women need not compete with male counterparts, right? Given that the physiology of men and women is clearly different, you can't have the same strength and physical test parameters. So this has been lowered to match that of women candidates. Maternity leave, childcare leave has been not only implemented, but it has been promoted so that there is more awareness. The CAPFs actually provide a very flexible maternity leave and childcare facility. And even at the places of deployment, they have creche facilities where women officers can take care of their infants, of their young children. Daycare centers are set up where support is arranged for them through nannies and other such facilities. And also measures are implemented to ensure women officers are not subjected to any kind of sexual harassment at workplace. The Vishaka guidelines are strictly implemented. Every complaint is strictly taken up by the forces so that there is not a single instance within the forces where the male counterparts might sexually exploit, molest their women counterparts. So this has been a critical step. The government has been also trying to create career progression opportunities. So there are equal opportunities for women to progress in their career, to get promotions, just like their male counterparts. So this is a work in progress. The numbers will not improve overnight, but the efforts have been undertaken. The parliamentary standing committees have played a big role. Their recommendations have been valuable, and the Home Ministry and CAPFs are working on them to try and increase women representation in CAPFs. Given the pivotal role they play in internal security, also given some allegations in conflict zones where some CAPF troops allegedly have been involved in targeting women or committing rapes and sexual violence, right? It's very essential to have more women officers in these forces as well to make them more sensitized. So that is why the topic is very important. I feel this could be a very good mains question. So please take up this practice question. The discussion gives you a lot of data, insight, which you'll not get otherwise on the representation of women in our CAPFs. Now let's look at another article from Internal Security. Bomb hoax threats. This became a huge menace a couple of months ago. We had discussed this as well in our UCAN sessions and in our daily Hindu news analysis. In October especially, thousands of hoax bomb threats were issued to various airlines and airports in the country. What was different was most of these threats, they came as text messages or emails or posted on social media, especially on X. So these anonymous posts and messages and mails started coming up everywhere. Most of them were being sent by using VPNs, virtual private networks, where the user can hide, mask their identity, their address, their IP address, their location, right? So clearly anonymous requests were being flooded targeted towards Indian Airlines. And this caused a massive disruption in the industry, in the civil aviation industry. Thousands of flights were cancelled, delayed, diverted, and this incurs a significant financial expenditure, right? It leads to crores of rupees in losses for every flight which is delayed or diverted or cancelled. Imagine hundreds of them happening back to back simultaneously. It led to complete chaos in Indian airports. Passenger civil aviation traffic was completely disrupted, and the losses amounted to millions and millions of dollars, which severely affected our civil aviation industry. So clearly, this was a major security threat. It represented a misuse of social media and communication platforms, posing a direct threat to our security interests. So first, take up a question, then I'll discuss what change has been introduced to deal with these hoax bomb threats. Hoax bomb threats to flights issued through messages, mails, and social media posts are now made punishable under which legal provision? This was the new development. Under a certain legal provision, the government has made certain changes to provide for specific punishment for those who give these hoax bomb threats through messages, mails, and social media, because previously this was not adequately covered under existing laws. So what's the correct answer? Is it under IT rules, which deals with all forms of communication media and social media, or UAPA, which is our primary law against terrorism, or aircraft security rules, or Airports Authority of India Act 1994? Most answers are saying C, but a lot of answers are also in favor of A. The correct answer is option C. Under aircraft security rules, a new amendment has been introduced by the Ministry of Civil Aviation. So that was the news which was reported across media outlets. So through an amendment to airport security rules, specific provisions have been included to ban and provide punishment for those who issue hoax bomb threats to airlines that can disrupt civil aviation through messages, mails, and social media. So let's look at this topic. See, previously, when such hoax threats were issued, see, hoax bomb threats, it's not a new concern. It's been there from a long time. We used to get hoax bomb threats through phone calls, posts, telegrams, now through messages, mails, and social media posts. Hoax threats have been there from a long time, not just against airlines, even against important buildings, locations, or well-known individuals and celebrities. So hoax bomb threats or any such faux pas threats, they were dealt with the regular criminal laws. There was no specific provision as such to deal with hoax threats. It was seen as a punishable criminal offense dealt with under the criminal laws, which was previously the IPC and CRPC. Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, they contained certain provisions dealing with the hoax threats. But this was never effective enough. The laws themselves were outdated. It never specifically dealt with hoax threats issued through social media or through communication platforms, right? It contained some jail term, arrest, some penalty, but it was never effective to deal with the new age threats that were coming up. All right. Now these laws have been replaced with Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita and the other law. So both IPC, CRPC have been replaced. So even now, there are provisions under the criminal laws to deal with hoax bomb threats, but that is not enough. It's not sufficient because these provisions were very limited. For example, if a certain threat is issued, right, especially when the airline, the flight has already taken off, when the flight is operational, only then penal provisions would apply. That's a restrictive provision. What if the plane is not operational? Maybe its schedule is tomorrow. Someone issues a threat today itself. Right? So there weren't adequate provisions to take care of that. Also, there was no provision specifically to impose further penalties on the miscreants who are issuing these hoax threats. So now changes have been done to the law itself. The legal framework is being changed. The Ministry of Civil Aviation has amended the aircraft safety rules, which specifically prohibits the issuing of hoax bomb threats to airlines under any circumstance. Whether the flight is in operation or it's an inactive flight, doesn't matter. And it covers everyone. Whether it's a passenger who's on board the flight issuing a threat or threatening the safety of an aircraft, or someone sitting outside of a plane, sitting in front of a computer or using a phone and issuing these random threats. Previously, this was not covered under the existing criminal laws. There was no adequate coverage. So now, specific coverage has been provided and hoax bomb threats to an airline is listed as a level 6 offense. This invites a penalty ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 1 crore rupees. It's not just the penalty, there will be a jail term as well, and they can be placed on the no-fly list. So by amending the aircraft security rules, specific provision has been added that prohibits any communication of false information through any medium, through any method, be it through a letter, through a post, phone call, messages, social media posts, or emails. Any form of communication of such false threats will be covered under this. It is prohibited, and whether the person is threatening the safety of an aircraft or the airport or civil aviation facility, or creating panic amongst passengers, the crew, or the general public, any such threat which is fake, which is false, is covered under this definition right now. This was not the case previously. Another new rule has been inserted. This authorizes the Bureau of Civil Aviation Security to place such a miscreant on their no-fly list meaning they can never board a plane in their future. Until now, placing a passenger on no-fly list was restricted to unruly passengers. If a passenger, let's say, was drunk and misbehaved with the crew and the fellow passengers, those passengers could be placed on no-fly list. Or if someone placed a threat, especially a bomb threat, while on board a flight, only those could be delisted and placed on a no-fly list. But now, even those issuing hoax threats through messages, mails, and social media posts can be placed on the no-fly list. This is a big deterrent. If they are caught, once their names are on the list, they can never book a ticket and fly with an airline in India. So this becomes a huge deterrent, and this provision has been added. Now there is another proposal as well. Ministry of Civil Aviation has proposed to amend another law, the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against Safety of Civil Aviation Act 1982. By amending this law, the ministry is proposing stringent jail term with a hefty fine. This proposed legal change will include a stringent jail term lasting several years. And as of now, the proposal is being considered within the government. Several ministries are debating about this. The concerned ministries are consulting with each other. Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Home Affairs and others, which are stakeholders, Ministry of Law and Justice. So all these concerned ministries are debating this proposal, and this might also be implemented. The Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against Safety of Civil Aviation Act might be amended, which will provide for stricter punishment by designating false threats as a cognizable criminal offense, which includes a strict jail term with a hefty fine. So please look out for this change, which might happen in the coming days. Also take up a question, a mains practice question. Clear? Now coming to the last two topics for today, let's quickly wrap up the session. There is a disturbing development from Manipur. Just the other day, a unit of Indian Army, which was conducting a combing operation in Churchandpur Hills, which is dominated by the Kukis, where Kuki militant groups are present. The Indian Army has confiscated a large consignment of arms and weapons and explosives. You can see the image which I have added over here. The Indian Army posted this on X, stating they have confiscated a huge consignment of arms and weapons, including sniper rifles, assault rifles, and pistols, grenades, and a lot of ammunition. But what took everyone by shock and surprise was the presence of these two gadgets in this particular image. What looks like an antenna, right, with a receiver terminal. So what is important here is the logo on this equipment. This logo right here is associated with a company, Starlink, owned by Elon Musk. So this has raised concern not just amongst Indian social media users who spotted the Starlink equipment, which was confiscated from the militants, but it has raised a serious concern amongst our security and intelligence agencies as well. Right? So let's understand what exactly is Starlink and what controversies are related to Starlink. What has Elon Musk said about this allegation, and can Starlink operate in India? These are some things we need to explore. See, Starlink is one of the entrepreneurial ventures of Elon Musk. Elon Musk not only owns X, SpaceX, the private space firm known for its landmark space missions, or Tesla, which is a pioneer in EVs. Right? Apart from that, Elon Musk has another major venture called Starlink. It's a constellation of satellites, very small nano satellites, thousands and thousands of them, which are being launched into low Earth orbit. As of now, latest data shows that there are close to 7,000 Starlink satellites in low Earth orbit. Any enthusiasts of astronomy, right, who do stargazing, they would know about this, because whenever you try to stargaze, with your telescopes, you often face a disturbance from a train of objects which are moving like a trail or a train. The constellation of satellites that you see is nothing but the Starlink constellation. Eventual plan of this company is to have 30 to 40,000 satellites or more than that. The numbers go as high as 50 to 60,000, right? So the plan is to deploy thousands of these small satellites in low Earth orbit, which move like a train, right, in a straight line. And the idea is to cover most of the Earth and provide satellite-based broadband. This is projected as a revolutionary tech to provide broadband internet connectivity, high-speed internet connectivity to every nook and corner of the Earth, to every mountainous area, to every valley, to every forested region, to every desert, because satellite services can be uninterrupted. Clear? So there is great potential. There is great economic and social purposes that can be fulfilled with such a project. But however, Starlink has raised a lot of controversies. First of all, it faces strong opposition from astronomers, right, from researchers and scientists, because it has been causing a lot of disruption. The Starlink satellites, as I said, there are 7,000 plus already. The plan is to have 40, maybe 50, 60,000, and this could easily become a nuisance for stargazing, right? It can actually interfere with the long-range intergalactic observations done through space telescopes, because they do reflect light and it creates light pollution. It creates a big distraction. More importantly, so many objects in space increases space debris, because these satellites will require multiple launches. A lot of debris is getting left behind, which increases the risk of a deadly accident where objects might collide and create a domino effect, and it could almost destroy space ventures itself, right? So there is a big risk given the number of satellites, the sheer number that Starlink plans to place in low Earth orbit. But other than this, there is another bigger concern: the usage of Starlink communication by various entities in conflict zones. For example, in Ukraine, it has been reported that Ukrainian forces have been supplied with Starlink terminals through which they are accessing high-speed internet and location and targeting information, which has been used by Ukrainian special forces to target Russian forces. In fact, Russia has already taken offense against the company, against Elon Musk himself. There's a huge controversy regarding the role of these private companies in today's conflicts. How a private company, through its revolutionary tech, can define the future of warfare. So this is a new emerging hybrid threat in itself. And similarly, several terrorist groups, rebel factions, have gotten hold of satellite terminals linked with Starlink, which allows them to have access to high-speed internet in remote areas, which could be enabling terrorist activities and insurgent activities. So the detection of a Starlink satellite terminal with a Manipur-based rebel group, most likely the Kuki militants, is of alarming concern, and because Starlink as of now is not allowed to operate in India. India has not yet given approval for satellite-based internet. Starlink is desperately waiting for approval, but India has denied the permission as of now. You might be aware of the controversy between Starlink and Reliance, right? The Ambani versus Elon Musk competition, which is going on as far as satellite spectrum is concerned, right? So when the controversy broke out, when this social media image went viral and Indian users started tagging Starlink and Elon Musk himself responded. He posted on his account on X that this is a false claim, meaning he is discrediting the claim of the Indian Army and claiming that Starlink satellite has been turned off over India. It's not still accessible in India. While that is true legally, but the very fact that militants had a Starlink terminal with them indicates potential usage, or else why would they have it as part of their large arms consignment? Clearly, even though the services are not available, by the way, if you look at the company's website, Starlink right now is not accessible in India because it's still waiting regulatory approval. It's not accessible in most of our neighboring countries as well, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, in Myanmar especially. One might argue that maybe the Kuki militants got it in Myanmar, from where they source weapons and other support, right? and maybe it's available in Myanmar. But that's not the case. Even in Myanmar, it's not operational. So it raises a big question whether Starlink services are accessible, even though the company claims that it's not accessible, right? So Indian security intelligence agencies are looking deeper into this. As of now, Department of Telecom has not given any regulatory approval, be it for Reliance or be it for Starlink. So recently, the Department of Telecom has stated that TRAI will take a decision on this matter. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India will come out with a methodology so government can allocate the satellite communication spectrum. Reliance was pushing for an auction so that the Indian company might have an edge in an auction, but the government has, as of now, informed that it will not be auctioning that spectrum, which is a strategic spectrum, but rather it will be allocating it to different vendors. So this has been seen as a victory for Starlink, because Starlink might get a favorable allocation along with some Indian companies. So it has led to this economic or business competition between Reliance Jio and Starlink of Elon Musk. But however, the very fact that the company cannot operate, they can't legally provide services in India. No satellite-based communication services can be provided as of now legally, right? And yet the militants had a satellite terminal with them, is something we should take note of, because this represents a serious security breach, right? If terror groups, insurgents are getting hold of it, if private tech is getting used by insurgents, terrorists, or in conflict zones, in wars, as we have seen in Russia-Ukraine conflict, this is a major concern, right? This is something that India also considers as an emerging hybrid threat. Now, coming to the last topic, this is from disaster management. As I said, we will take up a quick case study from disaster management based on Cyclone Fengal. We have studied about Cyclone Fengal in the previous UCAN session, right? We just have to understand something unique about Cyclone Fengal. Though it was a low-intensity cyclone, it caused large-scale destruction, resulting in significant loss of life and property. So that was quite surprising, and it has taken even experts by surprise. So today we can understand why Cyclone Fengal was so destructive, despite its low classification. Now, if you look at IMD, India Meteorological Department, right, which classifies cyclones and provides early warning and forecasting, it designated Cyclone Fengal as a low-intensity cyclone, right? Because its wind speed was estimated to be in the range of 75 to 95 kilometers per hour, which places it as a low-intensity cyclone. But still, if you look at the eventual damage, if you look at the landfall event, it made landfall somewhere near Puducherry, along the coastline of Tamil Nadu, but it brought heavy rainfall, unprecedented rainfall in certain districts of Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, which led to flash floods and landslides, and 12 people were killed. There was large-scale destruction of property, crops were destroyed as well. So how was this possible? Even though it was a low-intensity cyclone with a wind speed of just 75 to 95 kilometers, how could this bring such heavy rainfall, cause such flooding and landslides, resulting in so many deaths and property destruction? Even infrastructure in the region suffered significant damage. Air transportation was disrupted, particularly at Chennai airport. Then road and rail infrastructure, bridges were severely damaged. So what could be the reason behind this? So let's study this from a technical perspective. See, IMD categorizes cyclones based on its associated wind speed. When IMD picks up a low pressure center in the northern Indian Ocean, it immediately designates them, right? It categorizes it as a low pressure center when the wind speed is below 31 kilometers per hour. As it picks up more winds from the high pressure zone towards the low pressure center, and the cyclonic system starts building up, because there is a constant moisture which is being provided through evaporation from the surface of the sea, right? The cloud volume also gets built up, and the wind speed picks up intensity. So it gets classified as a depression with a speed range of 31 to 49 kilometers. Then it proceeds to become a deep depression, a cyclonic storm, which has a wind speed in the range of 62 to 88 kilometers per hour. This is the anticipated wind speed when it makes landfall, right? Because that is what eventually causes all the damage and destruction. Then once it crosses 89 to 100 kilometers per hour, it becomes a severe cyclonic storm. Very severe cyclonic storm when it touches closer to 150, 200 kilometers per hour. And above 222 kilometers per hour, it's classified as a super cyclone. This is the standard categorization. Now, if you look at cyclone Fengal, its estimated speed, as we saw, was in the range of 75 to 95 kilometers per hour, which places it as a cyclonic storm but with a low intensity. IMD had given early warning that this is going to be a low intensity cyclonic storm. And as a result, authorities were not adequately prepared because we have seen some deadly cyclones in the past. We have seen super cyclones, severe cyclonic storms. Look at the 99 Odisha super cyclone. 10,000 people plus were killed. Speeds were about 222 kilometers per hour in the range of 250, 260 kilometers per hour. Look at Cyclone Philene in 2013. The wind speed was at 215 kilometers per hour. Same with Cyclone Umphan in 2020. Wind speeds above 185 kilometers per hour. So compared to these mega super cyclones, Cyclone Fengal was just a baby cyclone, as experts call it. According to IMD, it was just a low intensity cyclonic storm. But eventually it caused a lot of damage, especially after landfall. See, landfall is an event where the cyclone crosses over from the sea towards the land. So once cyclone makes landfall, it encounters a lot of obstruction, right? It faces obstruction from the buildings, from the trees, the natural cover and the very terrain. Plus the moisture is cut off. The source of moisture is cut off. And that kills the cyclonic system. It only brings high-speed winds and rain, causing that tragedy. But generally, with a low-intensity cyclone, after landfall, significant damage is not expected. But in this case, why did this happen? Why did the rainfall continue? Why did heavy rainfall occur all of a sudden? This has been linked with the movement of the cyclonic system, the slow pace at which the landfall occurred. Usually, landfall is a quick event that occurs within a few hours, where the cyclone crosses over land, encounters all the obstruction and loses its steam. Right? It weakens, bringing heavy rainfall, some high-speed wind, and it eventually dissipates. But this did not happen immediately in the case of Cyclone Fengal. There is data from IMD to show that the cyclone, after making landfall, did not make a full crossover. It was lingering partly in the sea, partly over land, which means it was still getting a supply of moisture from the sea, which was still fueling the cyclone even as the landfall event was occurring. And then the wind speed picked up with heavy rainfall, unprecedented rainfall coming in because the cyclone was not dissipating. Now, this is a very rare and unique phenomena. So further studies will be needed to establish its links with climate change and global warming. But this is something that is quite rare that we have seen. Because even when we look at other severe cyclonic storms, death count was almost nil. You look at the major cyclones in last 2-3 years, death count has been nil. We have achieved zero casualty in some cyclones, right, which were graded as severe cyclonic storms. But a low intensity cyclone causing 12 deaths, heavy rainfall after landfall, and unprecedented flooding and landslides is something which is very unusual. And this has been associated with the way in which the cyclone was moving. It almost remained stationary for 12 hours near Puducherry and the coastline of Tamil Nadu. It partially made landfall and did not dissipate further. So it was still getting fueled by the evaporation happening in the sea. And it brought this heavy, intense rainfall into the coastal areas that eventually caused landslides and flooding. That is what led to destruction of property and the loss of lives. So this shows that we can never be complacent when it comes to disasters. The disaster management authorities, they can't be complacent just because the early warning says that it's a low intensity cyclonic storm. You should always be prepared for any eventuality. So it's a very good case study. Further studies will be needed as well as to why the cyclone lingered during landfall, why it remained stationary for almost 12 hours, which is almost never seen. Generally, landfall is a quick event, a spontaneous event that happens in few minutes to maximum 1 hour. But this time, 12 hours, the cyclone remained where it was, and it kept getting the moisture from the sea and bringing the precipitation and the higher speed winds, which was not anticipated. So that is what made Cyclone Fengal very unique and thus very important for our exams. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope all of you have liked the session, understood everything that we have discussed, and do support us with your likes and comments. And if you want the PDF with and without the annotations, please join my Telegram channel. I've shared the QR code at the start of the session. You can scan the QR code, and also in the video description, there is a link where all the PDFs are uploaded for all our YouTube sessions. So you can either click on the link in the video description itself and download the PDF later, or if you want it immediately, the better option is to join the Telegram channel where I'll be sharing it within a few minutes. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. Do let me know how the session went, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. We'll see you in the next session. Take care. Have a good night.